Good morning to you, David.
Morning.
Thank you so much for joining us. Lots I want to talk to you about, but I would like to get your thoughts, first of all, on President Zelensky's visit to the UK to meet with Rishi Sunak. This after meeting the French President Macron, the German Chancellor Schulz and Italian officials over the weekend. What do you think we could read into this?
Well, what you've already heard is he views our country as almost certainly his best ally, certainly his best ally in Europe. As your colleague just said, we have led the way at pretty much every stage. And President Zelensky is probably a little nervous about the continuing resolution of the West. I mean, there have been reverberations in some countries the other way, and he wants to basically reinforce his position, reinforce the strength and the solidity of his position. That's perfectly sensible. We are going to be on his side for as long as it takes to win this war, and he's just making sure by coming here to talk with us. Indeed.
Well, look, let's talk about whether or not we're going to be on the side of, I suppose, I'm thinking the British people when it comes to government policy. Extraordinary net migration figures revealed. We're looking at pretty much just like a couple of thousand underneath 1 million people arriving net in this country last year, set this year to be over 1 million. The Home Secretary, Suella Braverman, is giving a speech today at the National Conservatism Conference, NatCon it's called, saying the government must reduce immigration before the next general election, that we are too dependent on foreign labour, and British workers effectively going to forget how to work, forget how to do things ourselves if we keep relying on such high levels of immigration. Is she right?
Well, I start by raising an eyebrow at this, because who's responsible for controlling immigration in the government?
It is the Home Secretary is railing against the government policy that she's in charge of.
Yes, which she will have agreed to. Every single aspect of this she has agreed to. She'll be a part of the cabinet. Indeed, she'll be the leading member of the cabinet committee that decides these things. So it is a little odd, to put it mildly. And look, actually, during the Brexit referendum, there was a lot of talk about immigration. Most of the people I spoke to at the time were not so much worried about the individual number. They were worried about us being in control, us being able to say yes or no. That's the first thing, and that's actually what's the case now. We can say yes or no. These numbers arise, partly post-COVID with, as we know, a reduction in number of people in our own workforce working, and representations from companies and industries to try to get people to work for them. And even now, you have agricultural sector complaining it still doesn't get enough.
Yeah.
So you can't win. Now, that being said, I think there is a major point here. And the major point is this. There is a capacity issue in the country in terms of how many you can absorb at a particular time. For example, one of the big areas where this manifests itself is in housing. We have had an increase in population in the last couple of decades of nearly 10 million people. Yet we haven't built anything like enough housing to deal with it. Similarly, public services. People say, they're going to come and work for the health service, maybe for a few years, but they're going to be dependent on it for the rest of their lives if they stay. So there is a substantive point here, although I do rather think it's odd that the Home Secretary is the person making this argument.
Well, you have this bizarre situation, as you say, people who voted for Brexit. We were sort of, it was claimed, absurdly by Ramonas and Remainers that we were just like little Englanders, pull the drawbridge up, we don't want any foreigners here. On the contrary, it was about, again, us being in control of who gets to come here. We want people who are skilled, people who are going to make a contribution to this country, not just a contribution to their own bank balances. Not unreasonable. It's how most countries operate their immigration policy. But the numbers we looked at, yes, we did see a number of EU citizens return home during the COVID pandemic. Understandably, a lot of Brits returned home to Britain as well in the same way. However, we have seen a massive, massive growth in the number of people coming from outside the EU. India in particular, hundreds and hundreds of thousands, over sort of 6, 7, 800,000. Now, that's fine. I've got no issue at all with someone coming from any particular country, as long as we are in control of what those people are contributing to this country. Now, one of the big issues we've got, and I think it's also the issue with, say, students, particularly from Nigeria, I think, mature students, postgrad, who are coming over and are entitled to bring their families. Now, we want people who have got great skills. They want to come to this country and they're going to often maybe stay here with their skills and contribute, be higher taxpayers, but people bringing in sort of 3, 4, 5, 6 members of their family who may not be contributors, that then becomes an issue, doesn't it?
Yes, and I don't actually understand why we make that allowance. I mean, mostly these are people coming to be educated, to take a master's degree or whatever. And that is a benefit in its own right. We don't have to encourage people in some way. I suspect what's happened historically, I don't know, but I suspect what's happened historically is one of the interest groups, like the universities, for example, have lobbied the country in the past. Yeah. But again, this comes back to the Home Office. Yeah. The Home Office is the primary keeper of these rules. I see no reason at all to say for a master's student coming to study, let's say at Imperial College, you can bring your family with you. Unless you'll be given indefinite leave to remain, I can see no reason for it whatsoever. Yeah. So those things can be tidied up and should be, frankly, because they appear to have been dreamed up without even consulting the British people.
But we're constantly told that students are this wonderful net benefit and they're bringing them in, but actually, very good idea to keep a lot of these good students. But a lot of people who are travelling here as students, they're not doing worthwhile courses. They're doing useless courses that aren't actually going to get them, or learning English. Well, that's no use to me. That's not going to benefit my country. And we're often bringing in people from abroad, whether they're students or whether they're already qualified, to do jobs which our British-born people would already like to do but are banned from doing. For instance, I'm going on about this a lot, but medicine, the fact that we limit the number of people who can train as doctors, even though we've got, something like 3,000 or 4,000 people who've got straight grade A levels in science subjects who would love to study medicine, but we limit the number of people we've got to be allowed to study. And then we say, we haven't got enough doctors, we'll have to import them. This is insane.
Yeah, there's a real left hand and right hand problem here in different bits of
I don't think the left hand even knows what the left hand is doing.
Well, the Department of Health certainly seems to have some trouble understanding the Department of Education and vice versa. But most countries actually give priority to their own people. And deliberately do that. They're completely unabashed about it, and so should we be. We should say, what's the British interest first? Now,
wait a minute. Is that xenophobic or racist? Because we're constantly told that is a xenophobic view.
No, it's not. No, it's not. Your country, your government is elected to look after your country first. Sure.
This is a crazy idea, David. It will never catch on.
I know it'll never catch on. Sure, you obey human rights principles. Sure, you want to be generous when you can be, but you shouldn't be generous with other people if it is at the direct cost of your own country.
But this is the key thing, isn't it? Is that if you run a big business, it's perfectly in your interest to get loads more people in the country who can keep wages down, flatten wages, a never-ending supply of relatively unskilled labour willing to work for low wages. Brilliant. And then meanwhile, there are other taxpayers. They're competing for jobs, for doctor's appointments, for school places, for housing, crucially, and for the job. Their wages are kept down. They can't afford it. But overall, look, GDP's gone up because we've got more people in the country. But actually, the reality is that, we are subsidising a lot of these people who are working in these low-paid jobs with housing benefit and everything else, and all these other working tax credits and the like. So even if they're working, they're not a net benefit to the country, while we have a few million Brits who don't work.
This is what I always think of as the Gordon Brown era. Back in Blair's day, they had a sort of...
Have we lost him? No, crucial moment. Let's come back. We've got David Davis back up. David, I'm going to move you on from Gordon Brown because we moved on talking about Keir Starmer wanting EU citizens. We've lost too much time. Wanting EU citizens to have a vote in general elections. What do you make of that?
Well, this is just him trying to gerrymander the electoral system. We do have occasionally foreign citizens allowed to vote here. They're normally from countries that have a very long-standing relationship, like the Irish. It's a reciprocal arrangement with the Irish.
Reciprocal, crucially, because this wouldn't be reciprocal, would it?
No, it wouldn't be. That's the point. Last year, the right of British citizens to vote in any European elections was taken away by the European Court. So this will be the reverse of that. And my view is very simple. With very, very rare exceptions, the person who votes should be a citizen of the country. Why? Because that's where their loyalties lie. if I'm a German, my loyalty is going to lie to Germany. If I'm a Frenchman, my loyalty is going to lie to France, unless I say I want to actually become a British citizen. And you can do that. You take an exam, you get sponsored, and within a few years you can become a British citizen. If you do that, you get the vote. Otherwise, it's just a way of jury rigging, of gerrymandering the system, because he thinks more of them will vote for him. It's the same as the votes at 16.
I was just going to ask you about that. 16 to 17-year-olds can already vote in Scotland.
Yeah. Well, again, that's because the SNP thought it was to their electoral advantage.
Yeah.
When my son was at school, they had a debate. When he was 18, they had a debate amongst the sixth form of the school. Should the voting age be dropped to 16? They didn't think so.
I had the joy, having written an article for the Telegraph some years back about why 16 and 17-year-olds shouldn't vote, and it ended up being used as a Scottish higher English exam paper. They used it, and I only discovered this when the first 3,000 abusive messages from Scottish teenagers arrived in my Twitter inbox. It was great fun, David, I have to say. David Davis, former Brexit Secretary, thank you very much. I still stand by it, though.